Imagine arriving in a new country and, well, having some people see your presence as the coming of nothing less than a messenger of Christ.
Wow.
Yeah, that's the incredible story of Pietro Ubaldi's arrival in Brazil back in 1951.
And what's fascinating, right from the start, is that level of anticipation, that spiritual significance others just projected onto him.
Definitely.
It really highlights a deep, maybe yearning for understanding and connection at that particular moment in time.
And that's exactly what we're exploring in this deep dive. We're taking a close look at the writings and experiences of Pietro Ubaldi, focusing on what became known as the Great Messages and his time in Brazil.
Right.
We'll be drawing from excerpts of Jose Amaral's book, Great Messages, to uncover some of the most important ideas and, well, surprising links within this compelling material.
And Amaral's work gives us a really comprehensive picture. I mean, he walks us through Ubaldi's arrival in Brazil in 51, the numerous talks and conferences he gave, his thoughts on reincarnation, the meaning behind the two messages, his interesting connection with Chico Xavier, and ultimately how his life's journey concluded.
Right. So our goal, our mission really in this deep dive is to grasp the central concepts Ubaldi presented in these great messages and understand why his presence in Brazil was considered so significant, all through the lens of Jose Amaral's account.
Sounds good.
Okay, let's get into it. First off, these great messages. What exactly were they all about?
Well, Great Messages, that was the title chosen for the Portuguese translation of Pietro Ubaldi's spiritual messages.
Okay.
It was done by the printing house Lake. Apparently, to avoid confusion with other books, they went with a title that really emphasized the importance they felt these messages held.
And they were definitely seen as important. Amaral stresses that these messages were described as originating from the highest planes of eternity, a realm far beyond our everyday earthly experience. That immediately suggests something extraordinary in their source, doesn't it?
It does. And Amaral points out several reasons why they're considered so significant. He talks about the profound spiritual quality of where they came from, the sheer depth of the ideas they contain, their inherent divine beauty, and the powerful way they connect directly with our human emotions, our inner lives. It's quite a powerful description.
It paints a picture of something truly special. And we learned that these great messages were actually just an introduction, like a kind of preview of Ubaldi's much larger body of work.
Exactly. That suggests an even broader scope to his thinking. Amaral even uses phrases like ultra-glorious, psychic, inspirational character to describe them.
Psychic inspirational?
That.
So like deeply inspired communication.
Yeah, think of it as a communication that feels deeply inspired and goes beyond ordinary mental processes, almost tapping into a different kind of knowing.
Which naturally brings up the question of how anyone could verify messages like these. Amaral addresses this, right?
He does. He explains that for people who already believe in communication beyond the physical realm, their own experiences in, say, psychic investigations might serve as a kind of act of faith.
A personal validation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's a key point for you, the listener, to consider. Personal experiences can be very convincing for some. However, Amaral also makes it clear that for the wider world, and especially for science, a different approach is needed, one based on observable evidence, experiments, logical deductions.
He mentions his own exploration into the mystery of existence, but sees these messages as like refining that understanding.
Yes, suggesting they resonate with logical thought too.
Yeah.
And then there's the comparison Amaral makes to the style of the Bible.
Yeah.
He likens the way these messages are presented to the Gospels and the letters of the Apostles, even mentioning Matthew 5.39, turn the other cheek.
That comparison immediately puts the messages into a familiar spiritual context, hinting at a similar kind of moral weight.
Definitely. But Amaral also notes an apparent escape from the uniformity of treatment, which suggests a flexibility in how these profound ideas are communicated.
Like a sensitivity to how different people might understand them.
Could be. So what was the ultimate aim of these great messages, according to Amaral's take on Ubaldi's work?
Well, the goal is described as nothing short of revolutionary to give humanity a new life, high and noble, based on the spirit.
Wow.
And this isn't just for individuals. It's envisioned as a transformative force for the entire world The divine yeast of the new civilization of the third millennium.
The divine yeast.
Yeah, ultimately striving for the kingdom of God on earth. That's a truly ambitious vision.
It certainly is. And it ties back to Ubaldi's own words from 1934, where he spoke to the people of Brazil about initiating a new Christian humanity.
Right, echoing Sir Oliver Lodge's view of Christ as the great captain of the forces of good.
Actively working to establish God's kingdom here on earth.
Okay, so we have this idea of the great messages as these deeply spiritual, significant communications aiming for a complete transformation of humanity. Now, let's look at one of the central messages highlighted, the message of Christmas. What can you tell us about that one?
The message of Christmas holds a special significance because it's presented as the very first in this cycle. It was received on Christmas Day in 1931.
Okay.
And this was a really important time in Ubaldi's life, right after he had taken that vow of poverty and moved to Modica.
That personal context really emphasizes his shift towards a more profound spiritual immersion, doesn't it?
It really does. And the message itself opens with this powerful call to silence, to setting aside all our existing knowledge and memories, to really opening ourselves up to his voice.
It's almost like a complete clearing of the mind, total receptivity.
Exactly. It stresses the importance of being open, like a blank page ready for new understanding. And the message immediately follows with a celebration of his presence and a promise of great good and a great prize for the listener's past faith.
So a sense of spiritual seeking being rewarded.
Yeah, but it also includes a warning, doesn't it? About humanity developing immense power, but lacking the necessary moral foundation to handle it.
That comparison to the dark Middle Ages, in terms of our psychology, that feels incredibly relevant even today.
Absolutely. A key takeaway here is this tension between our power and our ethics. The message highlights the dangerous imbalance between our technological advancements and our ethical development.
And it introduces the concept of pain, not as punishment.
Right, but as a force that compels you to reflect and seek in yourselves the forgotten truth. A catalyst pushing us to evolve towards greater happiness.
That idea that even suffering can be a catalyst for growth. That's a crucial insight.
It's a very different way of looking at pain, and the message suggests that the world is anxiously awaiting this word, sensing a major shift in human thought.
Implying a kind of readiness, a deep underlying desire for this guidance.
Precisely. It speaks to a collective, maybe unconscious awareness of the limits of our current thinking, a longing for something more meaningful. The message then really zeroes in on the core issue, humanity itself, our psychology, our inner lives. That's the real key to shaping the future.
And it suggests a long cycle of civilization is ending.
Yeah, and that we need to see things differently, not just blindly believe.
There's specific cautions too, right?
Yeah.
Against being controlled by technology, wealth, our own desires.
Yes, emphasizing the need for a pure inner spirit to maintain control. It's a call for inner mastery to keep pace with our external progress.
And the imagery becomes very vivid, descending into the bosom of each soul.
Yeah, offering a word of resurrection, lifting us higher levels of joy. It's a very personal, transformative vision.
It also critiques our tendency to identify solely with our physical lives, calling it a poor life, fast and full of uncertainties.
Really challenges our focus on the material world. And then there's that simple yet profound call to love one another.
Contrasting it with intellectual pursuits that have made souls rough.
The message clearly values compassion and human connection above purely intellectual achievements. It prioritizes helping, uniting, building up. Goodness is the primary aim.
And the dramatic declaration of Christ interposing love and light between the iron necessity of the law and humanity. That's incredibly powerful.
It really is. It suggests a form of grace, doesn't it? A softening of strict justice through divine love.
Yeah. And the prophecy of the world being divided, those who follow this path and those who don't, it carries a real sense of urgency.
The tone, as Amra points out, is one of immense tonality and boundless goodness. It even claims to be the synthesis of all truths.
It's a very bold statement.
It is, and the promise of a future return amidst powerful events to humble the arrogant and overcome evil adds a significant long-term perspective.
It also expresses sorrow over the divisions within Christianity and calls for an awakening to a greater awareness, emphasizing the core spirit of the gospel beyond the structures that separate us.
It's a plea for unity. And the solution to all our problems isn't new systems or structures, but the emergence of a new man.
A fundamental transformation of the individual.
Exactly. Christ is portrayed as a unifying force, bringing peace, focusing on love, not human organizations. And that powerful statement, the lie that disfigures me passes, I remain, speaks to the enduring nature of truth.
It critiques beliefs and religions that have become just clusters of interests.
Yeah, rather than being guided by true principles, urging us to look for goodness in hearts and actions, not just external signs.
It's a very personal, internal way of assessing faith.
And it's mentioned that this message, especially when repeated on Easter 1943, was seen as the last word in a period of preparation and hope.
Returning after 10 years of suffering to offer comfort.
Yeah, a sense of culmination and reassurance there. That reassurance extends to the idea of divine justice favoring the humble and the weak.
And it acknowledges that the world is experiencing the struggles it has, in a sense, chosen. Pain as God's school and sanction.
Right, where we learn our deepest lessons. The universality of his voice is emphasized, transcending human disagreements.
But it also acknowledges that sometimes divine intervention is necessary for justice on earth.
Exactly, even if it seems disruptive. It's a nuanced view of how the divine interacts with human affairs.
And we're told humanity has entered a phase of active preparation for this new civilization.
Yeah, with progress being made steadily over the preceding 2 decades, despite global conflicts, suggests an underlying plan moving forward.
The timeline of these messages is quite interesting, too. Starting Christmas 31, ending Easter 33, then reappearing at 10-year intervals.
Yeah, and the initial cycle aligning with the time around Christ's death adds another layer of symbolic meaning.
And the parallel drawn between the beginning and end of that first cycle. This idea of necessary destruction and a great baptism of pain for renewal.
Guided by these unknown individuals working quietly behind the scenes, it's a powerful image of transformation through hardship.
And then, about 20 years later, around 1951, humanity reaches a crucial point.
Right. Facing what's called the Luciferian revolt of materialistic atheism as it approaches its ultimate downfall.
So like a strong cultural move towards materialism and rejecting spiritual beliefs.
Exactly. This sets the historical stage for Ubaldi's arrival in Brazil.
Okay, so that gives us a good understanding of the nature and the content of these great messages. Now, to understand Pietro Ubaldi himself, Amaral delves into his background and early life. What were some key things you noted there?
Well, his family history in Foligno seems significant. They were known more for their dynamism, dignity, and honesty than great wealth coming from humble roots.
Interesting, given the typical focus on riches.
Yeah. What's striking for you, the listener, is this early internal conflict he experienced. A real disconnect between a privileged external life and this deep-seated spiritual yearning.
Which ultimately drove his life choices.
Yeah.
And Ubaldi himself held a very different view of wealth and fame, didn't he?
He did. Amaral points out his awareness of the original injustice in wealth accumulation and inheritance, even referencing Christ's teachings about the wealthy.
A critical perspective on material stuff.
Yes. His parents are described as good people, valuing life and work. His upbringing in Foligno was in a well-known home, filled with culture, religion, work, discipline, love, and comfort.
But with this prevailing atmosphere of kindness without fuss.
That contrast is fascinating comfort alongside these spiritual sensitivities, a sense of something beyond the material. And the deep respect shown to his mother at her death really speaks volumes. And later, Ubaldi saw the human being as shaped by parents, environment, and experiences, highlighting those formative years.
So how did the town of Foligno itself influence him?
Amaral suggests it was a particularly favorable environment for this herald of the new civilization. Its location, history, the transition into the 20th century. Ubaldi knew the modest people, the workers, and had a deep connection to nature.
And that powerful image of him at the Gothic cathedral, feeling his destiny, seeking quiet thought away from the stridor and suffering.
Sounds like a very formative spiritual experience. And Amaral mentions his early visions and the lack of understanding he got from parents and authorities.
Which likely contributed to his introspective nature, his inner conviction.
Seems so. Foligno, with its natural beauty and religious heritage, provided fertile ground.
Moving on to Ubaldi's descent and early sensitivities. Amaral quotes Emmanuel through Chico Xavier, saying Ubaldi interprets the thought of the high spiritual spheres from where he comes from.
Yeah, suggesting a long preparation before his life on Earth. It frames his life's work as a planned mission.
And the contrast between his external life as a rich boy and his internal Franciscan spirit.
Quite striking. He felt like he was in the world as if by mistake, with a heightened awareness, more instinct than logic.
Carrying another world within him, Must have been hard to reconcile inner and outer life.
Probably. And the misunderstanding of his visions only deepened his introspection. He learned early to rely on his inner guidance. Amaral also notes he grasped evolution early, feeling it meant more than Darwin described.
And his decision to give to God what is God's and to Caesar what is Caesar's, like a practical way to navigate the world.
Suggests a conscious effort, fulfilling worldly obligations while prioritizing spiritual ones. When he went to university, law school was apparently a disappointment intellectually.
But his connection to Christ and St. Francis deepened then.
Yes. He began seeing God's hand in life and history, and he consciously chose to stay outside worldly pleasures due to those prior spiritual commitments he felt.
Speaks to a deep spiritual orientation. And interestingly, after his law degree in 1910, his thesis was on emigration to Brazil.
Yeah. Fascinating detail, foreshadowing his later connection. Then he studied further in England.
Now, Amaral describes Ubaldi's life in cycles. The first 20 years included his marriage to Maria Antonita Solfanelli.
Yes, and initial happiness. But beneath that surface, Ubaldi apparently felt an aversion to the responsibilities of wealth, preferring rich endowments of the spirit.
Managing inherited properties became difficult.
Led to financial challenges, and he increasingly turned to spiritual life for freedom from material concerns. This detachment was misunderstood by relatives who criticized him.
But his affection for the gospel grew, turning to Christ for guidance.
Seems those early difficulties solidified his spiritual path. Then came a huge turning point, his vow of poverty at age 41.
Influenced by St. Francis. That seems pivotal. Amaral quotes him, "I am made of pain," highlighting how suffering and love intertwined for him.
He saw it as sealing a pact with his master.
Well,
even after his father died, he acted according to that vow.
His declaration, "It's cold, but I burn. It's dark, but I see," really captures his inner state.
Amaral emphasizes the immense spiritual benefit to humanity from this decision. His life after became peaceful, immersed in his spiritual world with Christ's presence as support.
He overcame internal struggles, good winning out, and pursued teaching as a way to live the gospel.
Yeah, seeing it as a way to live those principles fully. Accepting a post in Modica, despite preferring elsewhere, shows his commitment to Franciscan ideals: solitude, poverty, discomfort.
Even his 45th birthday was spent alone with God.
Shows his resolve. The great decision in September 31 to accept that post came after quiet reflection. Amaral describes his routine work, respected but seen as different due to his introspection.
He even returned to places where he'd had those early appearances of Christ and St. Francis.
Like reconnecting with foundational experiences as he started this new chapter, which leads us right to receiving the first great message.
Right. Christmas Eve, 1931, after family time, he prayed alone, and Christ appeared, dictating the message of Christmas. Must have been profound.
Incredibly so. And surprisingly, it got lots of media attention, though Ubaldi didn't seek it. Yeah. His voice told him not to worry, doors would open.
He accepted quietly, no self-promotion.
Amaral shares bits from other early messages too. The message of pain, freedom to act, but not from consequences, following Christ's example of peace, unity, prioritizing goodness over wisdom, then the message of forgiveness. Ubaldi felt totally dominated and excited by it all.
Overwhelmed and inspired. Shows the power they had on him. After Modica, he was transferred to Gubbio.
Yeah, another Franciscan city, where St. Francis supposedly tamed the wolf. Seems fitting. He lived solitarily in a rented room.
And offered his canticle of pain and forgiveness in gratitude.
So it said. Then, summer of 1932, he began receiving chapters of his major work, The Great Synthesis.
The Great Synthesis, monumental. Received over 3 summers, 100 chapters, written at night in the same tower as the Christmas message.
Each page a new revelation, even to Ubaldi. Sounds like direct channeling. Amaral describes it as a light from a great silent voice in a time of decline.
Aiming to re-emphasize Christ's core message through these revelations.
Talks about Christ's energetic influence, messengers working in universal evolution, a cosmic perspective. While truths transcend time, the coming century would see remarkable renewals.
And his voice described as divine and gentle, yet firm and compassionate.
Powerful combo. Despite this profound work, Ubaldi peacefully accepted he couldn't leave teaching. He reconciled material simplicity with desire for spiritual richness.
Recalled his childhood, mother's care. Had a specific teaching philosophy.
Yeah, more than transmitting facts. Engaging students naturally, sparking interest, moving beyond external pressures.
His writings started gaining wider recognition. Italy, Argentina, Brazil. He kept up via correspondence.
And in that same tower, he wrote The Norse, explaining the channeling of the great synthesis. It even won a biosophy competition.
The Nouric explores inspiration, citing historical figures like Moses, Buddha, Christ.
Ubaldi saw his role as helping people improve through his deep intuition, connecting to higher consciousness due to his sensitivity.
Using the image of an antenna, sensitized by suffering, reaching higher realms.
Which Emerald says was different from typical mediumship. Ubaldi's was unique, allowing contact with higher sources, direct messages from Christ.
An important distinction for his work. But the success of the Great Synthesis met a challenge: church condemnation.
Yes, placed on the Index Librorum Prohibitorum, hindered its spread, though sparked curiosity. Circulated abroad by spiritists and spiritualists.
Vatican's stance didn't change, despite Ubaldi's clarification.
But Emerald notes times were changing. Even clergy sought wisdom in his books later, suggesting prejudices lessened.
Emerald felt that condemnation was almost inevitable, given resistance to new ideas challenging doctrine.
And limited vision focused on temporal power. Ironically, it freed Ubaldi from his childhood religious bonds.
Allowed him to fully embrace his own path. Ubaldi believed great creations come from intense suffering. Despite turmoil and criticism, he kept inner peace, living dedicated to Christ.
Faced difficulties living the gospel in the world, experienced disrespect. Personal anguish of WWII son Franco called to fight.
Franco described as deeply Christian, preferring death over killing.
His mother's hopes for financial support dashed. Ubaldi felt the loss but relied on divine providence, focused on ultimate questions leading to the great synthesis, Genesis to man to ultimate being.
The story of his son asking for school resonates with Ubaldi's life as a school. He wasn't into trivial pursuits, sought deeper understanding.
Internal conflicts between spiritual nature and material demands were significant. A 40-year struggle, with spiritual convictions winning. This prepared him for Brazil in 1951.
And that arrival was met with incredible excitement.
Yeah, Amaral vividly describes the enthusiastic welcome in Rio, July 6, 1951. Crowd of friends, admirers, journalists, filmed, photographed.
His departure to the Serrador Hotel seen as the arrival of the messenger of Christ.
Though Amaral notes it would take time for people to grasp the event's full meaning, Ubaldi then gave conferences across Brazil, São Paulo, Rio, Campos, a huge undertaking.
Logistics must have been complex.
Trains, lecturers, interpreters, editors. Ubaldi expressed immense gratitude for the kindness in Brazil, felt understood there, unlike Italy, planned more books with renewed faith.
And his voice confirmed Brazil was his life's purpose fulfilled, referencing the great colloquium in Marica.
Yes, and his ongoing acceptance of God's will emphasized the light of the cross and truth shining again, warning against intelligence without love.
Chico Xavier's vision of Ubaldi, saying goodbye to St. Francis, later confirmed by Ubaldi.
Interesting detail. Conferences continued, but his first visit ended with weakened health. Returned to Campos in November 51.
Medical exams found nothing. Stayed in Atafona to recover.
Gave a farewell lecture, wrote to Professor Clovis Tavares, expressing nostalgia for Brazil, anticipating future work. Even a miraculous passport resolution boosted his faith.
Then returned in 52 with family, fulfilling Christ's promise to spend next Christmas there.
Exactly. Welcomed in Santos, eventually reached Campos before Christmas 52. Ubaldi reflected on how it all unfolded as foretold by his voice.
Felt he was in Brazil to give and create according to God's will. Saw Brazil as the cradle of the new civilization of the Spirit.
And heart of the world, gospel homeland. His mission? Present the gospel in modern language, new knowledge about heaven. Reactions were mixed.
Saw himself as a mediator of high spirituality, an elective Christ, bearer of messages for the third millennium.
Reportedly startled by the intense praise in 51, remembering Palm Sunday and crucifixion, led him to reaffirm his principles in winter 52.
What were those principles again?
Importance of clear thought, idea over person, duty of example, offering truth, not imposing it, never arguing violently.
Why Brazil specifically? Ubaldi himself said in 34 it was the promised land of the new revelation.
Chosen for initial understanding, blessed for first expansion of light, noting the instant and deep understanding of the humble.
Emmanuel echoed this in 38 Brazil, providing spiritual clarity. Humberto de Campos noted scholars drawn there. Seems like a perceived spiritual receptivity.
Definitely. Despite this purpose, Ubaldi lived with few material resources, often facing financial struggles. Amaral emphasized clear evidence of Christ's help.
Like Benedito Zancanner being guided to help him buy an apartment in Somachente.
seen as direct fulfillment of Christ's promise to help when needed. Even with challenges, Ubaldi continued lectures, conferences, book ideas. Amaral calls him a flame that burns in the darkness.
His time in Brazil wasn't easy, though. A terrible campaign against him for relying on his daughter financially.
Yes, he lived simply in São Vicente, writing at a specific table. Interestingly, no other author's books in his room, relied on inner knowledge.
Surprised when reading Andre Luiz's Evolution in Two Worlds, finding similar ideas.
Yeah, avoided interviews about his personal life. Latter half of 55 involved travel, work, found peace at Passana Farm.
The allegory of the angel becoming a fish, symbolizing sacrifice, spirit versus material struggle.
Ubaldi's serious living of the gospel contrasted with the world's superficiality. He nursed his ailing wife, Antonietta, who died in 68. Completed principles of a new ethics, despite hardships.
Reaffirmed his passing in his writings, saw his work as between him and God, not needing worldly validation. Felt Christ's closeness.
Nominated for Nobel Prize in Literature 64, helped publicize his work. Had edifying conversations, visited Coxa for strength before Brasilia trip in 66.
Welcomed in Brasilia as founder of the New Civilization. Programs there in Rio clarified the great synthesis. Radio featured his voice.
Spoke of past present sins, saw vow of poverty as vow of spiritual activity. At 82, still writing, explained his mind matured independently of his body.
Explored this in the functional technique of the law of God.
Considered Christ the culmination of his work, focusing on his divine nature, guiding humanity. Left his work to the world in Avancemos.
Continued overseeing dissemination, mind sharp despite age. Focused deeply on Christ's I am.
Finished analysis of true cases, started Christ near the end. Final days in hospital lucid, passed peacefully February 29, 1972. Slight smile noted.
Final message. Necessary passion of the world leads to dawn of the new civilization.
Amaral sums up 20 years in Brazil as courageous faith. Silent suffering, learned from attacks, forgiveness, sowing reaping. Work's relevance grew end of 20th century. Encourages sharing his books if they resonate.
Reincarnation briefly mentioned Ubaldi as Apostle Peter. Others too.
Beliefs held by some, like Madeiros Correa Jr. Parallels cited. Christ central for Ubaldi appeared often, gave mission. Christ book culminates work on his divine nature, bringing Father's law. Ubaldi lived this seriously.
Amaral acknowledges Ubaldi's moments of hesitation, human struggle, pain at synthesis condemnation. Echoes Peter's doubt strength mix.
Anti-system concept mentioned negative creation, spirit's journey through matter, knowledge of Christ as escape. Ubaldi felt Christ's presence constantly. Quo vadis, story mentioned. Peter's revelation, concern for Christians. Similarities between Peter Ubaldi noted.
Amaral concludes with hope. Turn wounds to roses, tiredness to triumph through Christ. Need for crosses light, truth. Seek the Master's lamp.
Ends with, Christ in us, with us, for us, and on our behalf is the Christianity we need to revive ahead of the storms. Then a brief overview of the 24 volumes.
Starting with great messages. The great synthesis as cornerstone for new civilization. Mystical ascesis, spiritual experiences, peace. A man's history, idealist choosing gospel.
Current problems, building new world. The Great Battle, Spiritual Ascension Quest, Evolution and Gospel Psychologies, Practical Application, Fall and Redemption, Evolution, Love's Power.
Principles of a New Ethics, Psychoanalysis, Social Justice, A Destiny Following Christ, Spiritual Laws, Thoughts, True Cases, and Christ Culmination, focus on cosmic divine aspect, guiding from anti-system to system, completing his mission.
Amaral ends with gratitude for Ubaldi's profound legacy, born of elevation and martyrdom.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, you can really see how Pietro Ubaldi's arrival and work in Brazil, as detailed by Jose Amaral, offers just a compelling look at, well, spiritual transmission and the ongoing effort to understand Christ's message today.
Yeah.
Great messages present this powerful vision of inner transformation, emphasizing love, goodness, a deeper connection to the spiritual.
And what really stands out, I think, is the enduring relevance of so many of these ideas, the tension between technology and our moral maturity.
Right.
That fundamental human search for meaning beyond just the material stuff and the constant call for unity and compassion. These are themes that still resonate deeply today.
It really prompts you to think, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
In your own pursuit of knowledge, your own understanding, how do these insights from Ubaldi's great messages connect with you? Do they offer a unique perspective on your own journey as someone who's always learning, trying to make sense of it all? Perhaps exploring Pietro Ubaldi's complete works could provide even more to consider as we navigate the complexities of the 21st century
Definitely worth considering.
and continue to contemplate that relationship between the spiritual and material aspects of, well, human evolution.